The line moved slow. It always moved slow at Way Station 9. That was the thing about Thervani ports. They were clean, they were organized, and they made you wait anyway. The air smelled like recycled coolant and something faintly sweet, the kind of sweet that lived in your nose and never quite left. Darren Cole stood near the back of the queue and did not move. He had his bag over one shoulder. It was a small bag, one change of clothes, a few personal items, and a photograph he kept face down at the bottom. He was 54 years old, broad across the shoulders, with short gray hair and a face that had been weathered by things weather alone couldn't explain. His right sleeve was rolled to the elbow. The tattoo ran from his wrist all the way up and disappeared under the fabric. Unit crests, small numbers, and a column of black stars, inked in a neat row along the inside of his forearm. He had been standing in the line for 20 minutes. Nobody had said anything to him, but they had moved, not in any dramatic way, just the small, animal kind of movement, half a step left, half a step forward, that happened when something entered a space and the space adjusted around it without knowing why. The Thervani ahead of him kept their backs turned. A few had glanced over their shoulders once and then found something else to look at. Cole noticed. He always noticed. He just didn't care. The queue shuffled forward. The Port Authority checkpoint was a long white desk staffed by 3 Thervani officers in gray uniforms. They were tall, taller than most humans, with narrow faces and eyes set wide apart, silver blue, like coins left out in the rain. Their hands had 4 fingers each. Their movements were precise, in that way of people who had been trained to be precise and had decided it made them better than you. Cole reached the desk. The officer who stepped in front of him was young, maybe 23 in human years, or whatever the Thervani equivalent was. His uniform was pressed hard. His badge was centered perfectly on his chest. He had the look of someone who had never been truly tired in his life and thought that meant something. His name tag read, Vesk Oran, Port Authority Officer, Class 3. Vesk held out a scanner without making eye contact. Cole placed his ID chip in the reader tray. The scanner beeped. A small light on it turned yellow. Vesk looked at the screen, tapped it once, looked again. The line behind Cole had already stopped moving. Your exemption status has expired, Vesk said. His human standard was good, flat and clear, like someone who had learned it from a textbook and never spoken it with someone who was bleeding. It's an admin error, Cole said. The chip renewal went through 8 months ago. Check the secondary registry. Vesk tapped the screen again. The yellow light stayed yellow. The chip reads expired. I cannot clear you on an expired exemption. Then check the secondary registry, Cole said again. Same tone, same pace. Protocol requires I hold you for processing until the flag is resolved. How long? However long it takes. Cole looked at him. Not with anger, not with anything that had a name, just looked at him the way a deep river looks at a stone dropped into it, acknowledging the interruption without being altered by it. Hands, Vesk said. 3 seconds passed. Cole held out his hands. The magnetic restraints clicked on. They were standard port issue, built for species rated Class 2 threat or below. The classification covered dock workers, cargo handlers, transit passengers. It covered humans. The restraints hummed faintly against his wrists, just above where the tattoo began. Vesk turned him toward the processing bay and walked behind him. Nobody in the line said anything. A few Thervani civilians watched from the queue. One of them, an older dock worker in a scuffed vest, had stopped moving entirely. He was staring at Cole's forearm, at the sleeve of ink, at the black stars. Cole did not look back. The processing bay was down a short corridor, through a set of gray sliding doors. It was a plain room, white walls, white benches, white light overhead that had no warmth to it. A window of thick glass separated it from the main officer's station beyond. Vesk guided Cole through the door, entered something on a wall terminal, and left without another word. The doors closed. Cole stood in the middle of the room for a moment, then he sat down on the bench nearest the far wall, set his bag between his feet, and rested his cuffed hands in his lap. He looked at the far wall. It didn't do anything. He was all right with that. He had been awake for 30 hours, not because he couldn't sleep. He had learned long ago to sleep anywhere, in anything, through anything. But there was a kind of tired that wasn't about sleep, that lived somewhere below the body. He had been carrying that kind for a while now, and he had gotten used to the weight of it the way you get used to a scar. Not gone, just familiar. The room hummed. The light buzzed faintly. Through the glass window, he could see Vesk back at his station, already filing something, already moving to the next thing. The way young people moved, when they had never once looked up to find the ceiling gone. Cole breathed in through his nose, breathed out. He looked down at his hands. The restraints sat above the tattoo line, just above the first black star. He counted them the way he always counted them, not because he needed to, but because they were his to count. Nobody else's. 31. He had been 19 when he got the first one, a small crest, unit designation, done by a field medic with a kit that was only half legal. It had hurt in the way that things hurt when you are young and don't know yet what real pain is. He had been proud of it for about a week. By the time the last star went in, he had stopped feeling proud of anything. He tilted his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. Outside, through the glass, the way station moved around him. Transactions and transit forms and scheduled departures. The whole machine of a planet that had sat out the war and kept its floors clean and its records organized and its officers' badges centered. The restraints hummed. Cole breathed. The photograph sat at the bottom of his bag, face down, the way it always sat. He didn't think about it the way other people thought about things they carried. It was just there. The way the stars on his arm were just there. Part of the weight. Part of the accounting. He had a connecting flight in 3 hours. He had been in worse rooms than this. He let himself be still, and the room held him. And somewhere on the other side of that glass, a young soldier with a pressed uniform went back to his paperwork, and did not yet understand what he had just done. That was all right. He would. The first thing Cole noticed was the silence. Not the absence of sound. The room had plenty of that. The low hum of the ventilation, the faint mechanical buzz of the overhead light, the distant noise of the port beyond the glass. But there was a different kind of silence in a room full of people who are choosing not to speak. And this room had that. There were 3 other humans in the processing bay. They had been there before Cole arrived. All of them were seated on the white benches, 2 on one side, 1 on the other, and when he walked in, they had each done the same thing, in the same order, without coordinating it. They looked up. They looked at him. They looked at his arm. Then they looked somewhere else. Cole sat down, set his bag between his feet, rested his cuffed hands in his lap. He did not look at them directly, but he saw them all the same, the way a man who has spent enough years paying attention sees things, in pieces, in the corner of the eye, in the small signals that other people don't know they are sending. The first one was a woman, middle-aged, tired-looking, wearing the kind of worn vest that cargo manifest workers wore on long transit shifts. She had a datapad in her hands that she wasn't reading. Her eyes kept moving down to Cole's forearm and then back up to the middle distance, like she was trying to solve something. The second one was young, maybe 22, maybe less. He had a comm device in his hand, the kind young people carried everywhere, like it was a part of them. He had been scrolling something when Cole came in. He had stopped. The third one was on the bench directly across from Cole. Older than the woman, younger than Cole. He sat with his back straight and his feet flat on the floor, and his hands loose on his knees. Not tense, Just placed. Deliberate. The kind of posture that didn't come from a good upbringing. It came from somewhere else. He had been watching Cole since the door slid open. He hadn't stopped. The ventilation hummed. The light buzzed. Through the glass, Vesgoran was filing something at his terminal, head down, efficient, gone. The young man with the comm looked at Cole's sleeve again. His lips moved, very slightly. Cole had seen that before. People counting the stars. They always started at the wrist and worked their way up. Sometimes they got lost and had to start over. The young ones usually stopped somewhere in the middle, not because they lost count, but because they weren't sure they wanted to finish. This one kept going. He was slow about it. Careful. His eyes moved up Cole's forearm in small, measured jumps. 1 star, another, and his lips moved with each one, silently, until he reached the crease of the elbow. Then past it. Then up to where the sleeve started. He sat back against the wall, like someone had quietly taken some air out of him. 31. He had counted all 31. The woman with the datapad made a small sound. Not a word, just air moving through her throat in a controlled way. The older man on the opposite bench, the one with the deliberate posture, cleared his throat. He looked at the floor. He turned something over quietly in his mind, behind his eyes, and then he spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a low, even voice aimed at the floor between them. Kalos Station. It was not a question. Cole looked at him for a moment. He said. Silence. It was a different kind of silence now. The room didn't change. Same walls, same light, same hum. But the weight in it shifted, settled, became something you could feel in the chest. The woman set her datapad down on the bench beside her and did not pick it up again. The young man put his comm away. The older man with the straight back looked at the middle of the floor and stayed there. They all sat with it, not with Cole specifically, not performing something for his benefit. They sat with the word the way you sit with something enormous, carefully, with space around it, giving it room so it doesn't break you. Cole had heard that word dropped into rooms before. He had seen what it did. The word was not his exactly. It belonged to the 199 others who went in and didn't come back. And sometimes he thought the only reason he kept the 31 stars was so that word had something to land on, so it didn't just float. Outside the glass, the port moved. Thirvani civilians walked past in their quiet, organized way, rolling luggage, checking screens, living their afternoon. None of them looked into the processing bay. Why would they? It was just a room where transit flags got cleared. Just paperwork. Just a delay. The young man was looking at Cole's sleeve again. Different now, not counting. Just looking the way people look at something they can't fully hold in their head. Were you really there? He asked. His voice was too young for the question. The older man across the room made a small sound, the kind that meant, don't. Cole looked at the young man, not unkindly. Where else would I be? He said. The young man opened his mouth, closed it. There was nothing to say to that. He had been handed silence by 100 people since the war ended. Some of it reverent, some of it helpless, some of it guilty in the way of people who had watched from a safe distance, and were not sure what their watching had cost. He did not need any of it. He did not want to be someone's thing to feel something about. He just needed the flag on his chip cleared and a transit gate to open. He looked back at the far wall. The older man was still sitting straight, still looking at the floor. After a moment he spoke again, quietly, like he was talking to the floor more than to anyone. I enlisted the year it started, he said. They wouldn't take me. Said I had a heart irregularity. He paused. I used to think that was the worst thing that ever happened to me. He didn't finish the sentence. The unfinished part sat in the room, and everyone in the room understood what it was. Cole said nothing. Outside the glass, Vesk was still at his terminal, still filing, head down, badge centered, pressing forward through the organized machinery of his afternoon. He had not looked through the glass once since he left them in here. The woman picked her datapad back up. She held it in her lap, without looking at it. The light buzzed. The room breathed. Cole sat with his cuffed hands in his lap, and his bag between his feet, and his 31 stars under his rolled sleeve, and he waited the way only certain kinds of people can wait. Without the clock, without the need for it to be over, without the small daily panic that other people use to fill the quiet. He had learned to wait like this, in a place where the waiting meant something, where the waiting was the job. 14 months of it. No resupply, no relief. Just the gate that had to be held until someone else could get there. They got there. 199 reasons why they were able to. He tilted his head back against the white wall. The room held him. Through the glass, the port moved on. The door opened, and an old man walked in. He was Thurvani, tall, narrow-faced, with the wide silver-blue eyes that all of them had. But age had done something different to his face than it did to young Vesk's. Where Vesk was sharp and clean and new, this man was worn in. His skin had the particular softness of something that had been through weather and come out the other side. He moved slowly, not from weakness, from the deliberate pace of someone who had learned that most things did not require hurry. His uniform was darker gray than the officers', a wider badge on the chest, more script on the collar. Senior rank. Senior enough to personally process a backlog. He had a scanner in one hand and a datapad under his arm. He did not look at the room in the way Vesk had looked, as a problem to be processed. He looked at it the way you look at a room you are simply passing through. His name was Prefect Ashan Delk. He was 80 years old. He went to the cargo woman first, scanned her chip, checked something on his datapad, made a small mark, nodded. She stood, gathered her things, walked out through the door he'd left open. She glanced once at Cole on her way past. Just once. Then the young man. Same process. The young man stood, pocketed his comm, and left without a word. He did look at Cole. A longer look, the kind that was trying to say something and didn't quite have the words for it. Cole gave him a small nod. The young man left. Then the older man with the straight back. Delk scanned him, cleared him, and the man stood. He turned and looked at Cole, and he straightened slightly. Not a military salute, nothing formal. Just the spine adjusting itself out of old habit, out of something that lived in the bone. Then he walked out. The door stayed open. Delk crossed the room toward Cole. He was already holding out the scanner as he walked, doing it the way he had done it the first 3 times. Routine, efficient, the 10,000 form of a 10,000 form career. He reached the bench, and Cole lifted his cuffed hands and held the chip end of his wrist toward the reader. Delk ran the scanner. His eyes were on the screen. 1 second, 2, 3. His eyes moved, not to the screen. Down. To the arm. To the inside of the forearm, where the magnetic cuff sat just above the wrist. And above the cuff, the ink began. He didn't move. The scanner was still in his hand. The screen was still lit up with Cole's flagged ID. But he wasn't looking at any of that. He was looking at the tattoo, the way you look at something that reaches through the ears and grabs you by the front of the shirt. Cole watched him do it. He had seen this look before, on older faces. Not the counting look. That was for younger people, people who were learning. This was a different look. This was recognition. Delk's eyes moved up the forearm slowly, reading the unit crests the way you read words in a language you used to speak. He reached the engagement tallies, the small, precise columns of numbers, and his expression shifted in a way that was hard to name. Not grief, exactly. Not guilt. Something in between. Something that didn't have a clean human word. He kept reading. His eyes reached the stars. He started counting. Cole let him. Through the glass, the main station moved. Officers at terminals, civilians in windows, the steady machinery of a port doing what ports do. None of it came through. It was just the two of them in here, in the white light, with the buzzing overhead and the smell of recycled coolant and 31 black stars on a man's forearm. Delk counted. His lips did not move. His breathing did not change. But somewhere around 25, his hand, the hand holding the scanner, lowered itself, very slowly, to his side. He stopped counting. He looked up. He looked at Cole's face. Cole looked back at him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people standing on the same ground, measuring the distance between where they were and where the same history had left them. One man inside it, one man watching from a distance that had seemed safe at the time. Delk said quietly, "Third breach." Cole said, "Mm-hmm." Delk breathed out through his nose. He looked back down at the stars. He still had not finished counting. He did not try again. "I was signals," he said, not explaining himself, just placing himself in the frame of it. "Junior grade. I monitored the Kalos frequency for 11 months. He paused. We kept waiting for it to go quiet. Cole understood what that meant. A signals officer monitoring an active combat frequency waited for silence, because silence meant the fighting was over. For 11 months, Delk had sat at a console and listened to Cole's unit bleed through static and hold on. "Never did," Cole said. "No," Delk said. "It never did." He looked at the scanner in his hand. He looked at the screen, at the flagged ID, at the yellow light that had started all of this. He tapped the screen twice. The light turned green. He did not hand the chip back right away. He held it in his palm for a moment, looking at it the way you look at a small thing that has caused a large embarrassment. "The renewal was in the secondary registry," he said. "The flag was a system error. It happens." "I know," Cole said. "It should not have come to this." He gestured, one precise restrained gesture, at the magnetic cuffs on Cole's wrists. Cole looked at his wrists. He looked at the old Thurvani officer standing in front of him, with something working behind those silver-blue eyes. Something that was not quite guilt, and not quite shame, but was related to both. "A lot of things shouldn't come to a lot of things," Cole said. Delk held his gaze for a moment. Then he placed the chip in Cole's palm, and stepped back, and reached for the cuff release on his terminal key. The magnetic restraints clicked. The hum stopped. Cole's wrists were free. He did not rub them, did not flex his hands in the dramatic way people did in stories. He simply set them in his lap, and let the silence settle. Delk stood in the middle of the room, and for just a moment he looked like a man standing at the edge of something very large, looking down. Then he straightened. He tucked his datapad back under his arm. He looked at Cole one more time, at the face, then briefly at the arm, then at the face again. "I will personally correct the system error today," he said. Cole nodded once. Delk turned and walked toward the door. At the threshold he paused, his back to Cole. He stood there for 2 full seconds, not moving, like he was going to say something else, something that had been sitting in him for 80 years of not saying it. He didn't say it. He walked out. The door slid shut behind him. Cole sat in the empty room and looked at his wrists. The skin where the cuffs had been was faintly pink. He ran his thumb along it once. He pulled his sleeve down over the tattoo, over the stars, over the names and numbers and everything they accounted for. He reached down and picked up his bag. He was not finished yet. The room was not done with him, or he wasn't done with it. Through the glass, he could see Delk moving toward the officer's station, moving with purpose now, that old slow walk, traded for something more directed. He was moving toward Vesk Oren. Cole watched them through the glass. He set his bag back down. He waited. Through the glass, Cole watched it happen. He could not hear what was being said. The processing bay was soundproofed from the main station. Thick glass, no speaker feed. But he had spent enough years reading the language of bodies to not need the sound. Delk walked up to Vesk's terminal. Vesk looked up. His posture said, "I filed everything correctly." Whatever look Delk was wearing, it made the younger officer straighten further, the way people straighten when they are sure they have done nothing wrong, and are just now beginning to feel less sure. Delk spoke. Short, measured sentences. He gestured once toward the processing bay. Vesk's eyes moved to the glass, to Cole, sitting on the bench, and then back to Delk. Delk gestured again, at the terminal screen, at something on it. Then Vesk stood up from his seat. Delk walked back to the processing bay door. He entered a code. The door slid open, and he stepped in. A moment later, Vesk came through behind him, standing a half-step back with his datapad in both hands. The posture of someone who has been told to come and be present, and is not yet sure what for. The door closed. Cole watched them. He did not stand up. He did not adjust his posture, or change the angle of his hands. He sat the same way he had been sitting, bag between his feet, back against the wall, like the room was his, and they had come to visit. Delk stood in the middle of the room. He spoke in Thurvani, low, even sentences, aimed at Vesk, who was listening with his eyes, moving between Delk's face and Cole's arm. Cole did not speak the language fluently. He had picked up pieces of it over years, enough to navigate, enough to catch one word in 5. The word for station. The word for siege. A number, 200, followed by another number that meant something like survived. He watched Vesk's face. That was where the story was. The young officer started with the look all young people had when they were being corrected, the look that was trying to decide between defending itself and listening. Pressed chin, tight jaw, eyes a little too steady, holding his ground. Then Delk pointed at Cole's arm. Not dramatically, one clean gesture, 2 fingers, directed at the tattoo sleeve. He said something. He said it slowly, the way you say something you want to make sure lands properly. Vesk looked at the tattoo, really looked at it, the way he hadn't looked at it before. Before it had just been part of processing a flagged ID, markings on a cargo species. Now he was looking at it the way Delk had looked at it, as a record, as something that described a specific number of specific events. Delk kept talking. Cole could hear the tone change, still even, still measured, but building the way water builds behind something before it finds a way through. He heard the word for gate, the word for fleet. He heard the word that in Thurvani roughly translated to the thing that made the other thing possible. Vesk's datapad lowered an inch. Delk said something about the treaty. Vesk looked up from the tattoo at Delk's face. His mouth opened slightly, closed. Delk was not finished. He said one more thing, and he said it looking directly at Vesk. And he said it slowly enough that Cole caught 3 of the words clearly. Handcuffed. Last. Standing. The full sentence, Cole would understand it clearly later, when Delk repeated it in human standard, was this. You have handcuffed the last man standing from the event that allowed your planet to remain neutral. Vesk was very still. Not the polished stillness of a trained officer. Something else. The stillness of a person standing in a new and suddenly much larger room, not sure where the walls are. Cole watched the information move through him. It was not fast. It didn't come all at once. It arrived the way real things arrive. Slowly, in pieces, each piece making the next one heavier. The young soldier understood the siege. Then he understood what the tattoo counted. Then he understood the treaty, and the gate, and the 200. Then he understood the one. One out. Cole saw the exact moment Vesk understood there was only one. The pressed chin, the tight jaw. They didn't harden. They went soft instead. Not into weakness, but into something young that had just lost a certain comfortable padding. The padding of thinking that history was what happened to other people, in other times, on the other side of a neutral treaty. Vesk turned his head and looked at Cole through the white-lit air of the room. Cole looked back. He did not offer anything. Not reassurance, not absolution, not warmth. Not because he wanted the young soldier to feel bad. He had no use for that. Just because it wasn't his to give. The weight Vesk was holding right now was the weight of a truth that had always been true, and the young officer was going to have to find his own way to carry it. Cole knew a few things about that. After a long moment, Delk switched to human standard. His accent was thick, shaped by decades of Thurvani phonetics, but the words were clear. "Your exemption chip has been corrected," he said to Cole. "The flag will not appear again. I am sorry for the—" He paused, selected a word carefully, "inconvenience." Cole looked at him. He said. Delk held his gaze. He accepted that without flinching. He had earned that much. He looked at Vesk once more. A brief, final look, the kind a teacher gives when the lesson has been delivered and the rest is up to the student. And then he walked to the door, entered the code, and left. The door stayed open this time. Vesk stood in the room. He and Cole were the only two people in it. The ventilation hummed. The light buzzed. The port moved on outside the glass in its clean and organized way. Vesk was looking at the floor. His datapad was still in his hands, but he was not looking at it. His badge was still centered on his chest. Everything about him was still in the correct position, but something inside the correct positions had shifted, and would not shift back. Cole picked up his bag. He stood. He was taller than Vesk by about 2 inches. He just stood the way he stood. Even, settled, occupying exactly the space he occupied. He looked at the young officer for a moment. Vesk was 23 years old, and he had spent his whole life on a planet that had chosen the safe side of a war, and he had grown up in the peace that choice had produced without ever once being asked to consider what had purchased it. That was not a crime. That was just being young and being lucky, and not knowing you were lucky. He knew now. Cole walked toward the door. He did not say anything. There was nothing to say that the room had not already said better. He walked out. The corridor was longer than Cole remembered. He walked it slowly. Not because his legs were tired. They weren't. But because there was no reason to hurry. The transit gate was on the other end of the port. He had time. He had always been good with time. The corridor opened into the main port hall. High ceilings, gray-white floors that reflected the overhead lighting back up in dull smears. Rows of transit windows and food stalls and charging stations, and all the ordinary machinery of a place that existed to move people from one place to another, and asked nothing of them in between. He walked through it. People moved around him. Thurvani mostly, a few other species, a handful of humans here and there. All of them going somewhere, all of them in the middle of their own ordinary afternoon. Cole moved through the crowd in the same way he had always moved through crowds, without friction, without drawing attention, taking the clear paths. Old training, the kind that didn't leave when the uniform did. He was almost at the transit platform when he heard the footsteps behind him. Fast, deliberate. He did not turn. He kept walking. Sergeant Major Cole. He stopped. He stood there for a moment, bag over one shoulder, looking at the departure board above the platform. Gate 14. 42 minutes. He turned around. Vesk Orin was standing 3 meters back. He was slightly out of breath. His badge was still centered, his uniform still pressed. But his hands were not quite right. They were held in front of him, not loose at his sides the way a confident officer would hold them. He had come quickly, and he had not completely decided yet what he was going to say. Cole waited. Vesk opened his mouth. He tried something in Thervani first, then stopped, switched to human standard. I didn't know, he said. His accent made the words careful and angular, but they were clear. He was not making excuses. He had the sense to keep the word no small, to put it plainly, without decoration. Cole looked at him. I know you didn't, he said. Vesk's jaw moved. He was working through something. Cole let him work. The cuffs, Vesk said. He stopped. He looked at Cole's wrists, both sleeves down now, the tattoo covered. He looked back up. I would not have if I had known. Don't, Cole said. Vesk stopped. Don't tell me what you would have done if you'd known, Cole said. His voice was even. Not angry. Anger would have been too worn. Means nothing. What you did was what you did. Vesk stood with that. His throat moved. Yes, he said, quietly. It was. Cole studied the young officer for a moment. The pressed uniform, the clean badge, the face that had still not fully absorbed what Delk had put in it 2 hours ago, and would not, probably, for some time. That kind of knowledge didn't process fast. It moved in slow, in the night hours, in the quiet after the shift ended. Cole knew how that worked. He was not angry at the kid. He had not been angry from the start. Not really. There had been a flicker of something in that transit line when the cuffs clicked on. Not quite anger. More like the old familiar tiredness arriving fresh. The exhaustion of being reduced to a flag on a scanner. In a place that owed its quiet afternoons to the kind of work nobody wanted to think about directly. But he had filed it away. He was good at filing. How old are you? Cole said. Vesk blinked. 24, he said. Standard years. Cole nodded slowly. He thought about being 24. He had been in the middle of his third engagement at 24. He had not slept in a bed for 8 months. He had known the names of 11 dead men, and was learning the names of more. He had been very sure of himself at 24. The way you could only be sure of yourself before the world showed you the parts of itself you hadn't been ready for. He was not going to say any of that to this young man. Learn the history, Cole said instead. All of it, not just yours. Vesk nodded, stiff and earnest. I will, he said. He meant it. Cole could tell. It was in the set of his jaw, the way the promise landed behind his eyes. That counted for something. Not everything, but something. Cole turned back toward the departure board. Sir, Vesk said. Cole stopped, but did not turn. Vesk paused, chose the next word carefully, like a man pulling something out of a box he had never opened before. I'm sorry. The apology sat in the air between them. He had been handed apologies before. In many forms, from many directions. Some of them hollow, and some of them enormous, and most of them somewhere in between. This one was a young soldier's apology, built from embarrassment and new knowledge, and the raw discomfort of having done something he now understood the full weight of. It was not small. It was also not enough. The two things were both true, and neither canceled the other out. Don't do it again, Cole said. He walked toward Gate 14. He did not look back. The transit platform was less crowded than the main hall. A few Thervani travelers stood near the waiting benches, studying their comm devices, ignoring each other with the focused effort of transit station strangers. Cole found an empty bench at the far end, nearest the window, set his bag between his feet. The window looked out onto the launch field. Gray-white landing pads. Low-orbit shuttles crouched on their struts. A pale sky above the atmosphere dome. Not beautiful. Not ugly. Just the view from a bench in a port in a place that had nothing to do with him personally. He reached into the bag. He moved past the change of clothes, past the few small items he kept near the top for ease. His hand went to the bottom and found the photograph there, face down where he always kept it, slightly worn at the corners from how many times it had been moved from one bag to another. He did not take it out. He just held it there at the bottom of the bag, under his hand. The photograph was old, printed on real paper, which almost nobody did anymore. It showed 12 men and women in full gear, standing in front of a blast door, somewhere he could name precisely and never said aloud. They were dirty. Most of them were smiling. They did not know what was coming. Cole had been in it, third from the left. He was the only one he could still look at in it. The others had become something else over the years. Not ghosts, not grief exactly. Just a weight that he had learned to carry. The same way you learned to carry a limb that didn't work quite right anymore. You adjusted. You compensated. You moved. He took his hand out of the bag and straightened up. The departure board above the gate clicked. Gate 14, 31 minutes. He looked at the number. Then he looked out the window at the gray-white launch field and the pale sky, and let himself be exactly where he was. 54 years old, last out of Kalos Station, sitting on a bench, on a planet that had spent the war on the other side of a treaty, waiting for a connecting flight to somewhere that didn't know his name. He was fine with that. He pulled his sleeve back once, just slightly. Looked at the first black star, the small one at the wrist, the oldest one, put there by a field medic with a half-legal kit when he was 19 and proud. He looked at it for a moment. Then he pulled the sleeve back down. He folded his hands in his lap. The port moved around him. The clock moved above him. The stars on his arms sat under the fabric, quiet and counted. In the way of things that were finished and were not finished. In the way of things that a person carried, not because they chose to, but because they were the last one left, and that meant the carrying was theirs. He sat. He waited. Gate 14 opened 28 minutes later, and Darren Cole picked up his bag, and stood, and walked through it.